Good afternoon, blog viewers. We're continuing with our video focus this summer. I think we'll continue with the videos in the summertime, and also continuing since we came back from the break in the winter, revising a lot of the old posts. Continuing with psychology as we've done. I think most of the posts since the new year have been on psychology, and it's been certainly different perspective than a lot of the philosophy and literature we've discussed, and I think we'll focus on psychology for much of the remainder of the year, as it has really been giving different perspectives on the virtues, different takes and different vantage points that are all very useful, and many of which are true. So today we're going to look at it. Mainly the three psychologists we've been studying so far, or looking at, have been Kohut, Jung, and Freud. And today we're going to look at Freud, but I want to start with some preliminary remarks to sort of frame the discussion. And I want to start with a thought experiment. Let's go back 20,000 years and imagine a society where everyone is more or less living according to nature. There are very few organizations or groups. There's no nations. There's no societies of any form. Certainly no groups with the level of bureaucracy, organization, or structure that we see everywhere today. Whatever groups there happen to be at that time have formed more or less spontaneously, organically, to deal with some real problem or need that exists at that moment. Let's say there's a drought or an earthquake, some other natural catastrophe, and a group forms to deal with that problem, to resolve that problem, to create a solution to that problem. When that solution has been implemented, or when the problem is no longer there, the group, since it has no charter, the group has no offices, the group has no bureaucracy to keep it going and going forever, the group just disbands, and everyone goes back to their living according to their individual ways. Contrast that with a society today where there are groups literally everywhere. You can't go anywhere without finding a group or an organization somewhere of all sorts. And these things do not just exist for a minute, for a week or a day. They often exist for many years. They have an actual life of their own. They exist and they continue to grow. There are obviously various levels of bureaucracy and structure that we see in a lot of these groups. We could consider many things a group. One's job can be a group. There are religious groups, there are social groups, there are nonprofit groups. Even you could consider a nation or a city to be a form of group. There are various internet groups you can join. And I'm using the word groups very loosely at this point. There are groups of sort of television viewers that happen to watch the same TV programs, and there are groups of fans of baseball teams that gather around to watch a game, or that root for the same team, and on and on. So this is a group-filled society, we could say, with perpetual life of these groups. And in the other society, the one we started with, there's a society of largely individuals that happen to congregate for very specific purposes and then just disband. And which scenario would be better? So we would have to think about that. So one question you could pose after the thought experiment is, which is better? Which scenario is better? The second version with a lot of groups, or the first with very few groups? What is the good, you could start to ask, that is produced from any group, and what is the bad that is produced from a group structure? For what purposes do groups form at all? Are they really necessary? In what situations are they necessary? For how long are they necessary? You start to form a lot of questions once you engage in this experiment. And in raising these questions, it's pretty clear that at the outset, you can't just throw all groups under the bus or say, groups in general are all bad. Think about a group that is in charge of setting up a homeless shelter for the Thanksgiving holiday. that group rallies around this cause. It seems to be a good cause, sets up the shelter, and does good. No one would call any of that bad, and they are able to do more by sort of combining the forces than they would alone. No one could do all that by themselves. If it's for hundreds of people, the shelter, there's no way one person could do all that. So the group structure would be absolutely good and necessary to accomplish that goal, which is the setting up of the shelter. Or a group, you could say a building group that's, call it even a commercial building group. They build an office somewhere, and there's no way anyone could do that by themselves. The office that many of us work in, that had to be built again with a group, with a leader that sort of set the agenda and made sure the group was making progress in building the office. And there's no big deal with that. There's no problem. There's none of those problems that we're going to talk about in the rest of the post are implicated by those kinds of groups. But you can obviously imagine that there are situations where groups are very are not so good and are not as productive as the examples we've already given. And I want to focus a little bit on some of those groups. And to look at that, we're going to look at Freud's essay on group psychology for the remaining portion of this post. And unlike other posts, I'm not going to quote from it specifically. I'm just going to put the quotations in the post, but I'm going to sort of try to paraphrase most of it. But in general, Freud's view of groups and what happens in group psychology and the effects on the individual within a group are all rather negative. He does sort of, I would say, give lip service to the fact that people can engage in altruistic actions, and they were capable of accomplishing more, and especially altruistic actions in a group. Think of, Red Cross or something. And he does say that a group can be, more powerful together than it is alone, sort of like a multicellular organism can be more powerful when all the cells and the organs are sort of cohesive and forming a good cohesive structure. But the rest of the essay is largely, a very, very negative and what one could even say devastating critique of the value of groups. And obviously, Freud, writing in 1900, was not the first to criticize the group and its effects on the individual. Obviously, Nietzsche had many, many critiques of his own about group psychology and group effects on the individual. But even before that, there's a passage in the Republic that I think I want to read, and in Plato's Republic, that I think will sort of make a lot of the comments about Freud very clear. And it's in the section where the ideal city is being constructed, and there's discussion of what will be allowed to be said and what will be allowed to be taught the leaders of the city, the guardians of the city, in this ideal city. And in the description, someone asks, in setting up the city and in educating it, there's a question posed: Are we to allow someone who cannot follow our instructions to work among us, so that our guardians, the guardians being the future leaders, will be brought up on images of evil, as if in a meadow of bad grass, where they crop and graze in many different places every day, until little by little they unwittingly accumulate a large evil in their souls? And that passage, to me, suggests again the notion of within a group or within a society where there are various bad influences, and people are sort of unaware, unconsciously sort of taking them in little by little every day, as Plato writes there. That process accumulates in the long run in a much bigger evil, in a much bigger bad, in a much bigger harm to the soul than would otherwise. And it's again because people are little, in the way that Plato describes it, little by little, unwittingly accumulating something that's bad within them from the overall society. And that was one of the concerns of Plato, and of course led him to, in the ideal city, adopt and favor various forms of censorship, and one could even label tyranny. But that was motivated by that concern, at least. And so Freud, in a similar way, and I think you could see it very similar to not only Plato's discussion of 401b there, but also within the cave analogy, which we discussed But in very similar terms to Plato's description, in those passages, Freud also sees groups as being totally obsessed with false images, totally unconcerned with truth or reality, adorers of the unreal and the irreal, way too susceptible to various changing emotions, totally incapable of persevering in anything, way too gullible and trusting of whatever the group happens to believe at any point, no notion of any limits to the group's sort of behavior or any self-criticality, and moved obviously to extremes by varying levels of emotional stimulus. These were all problems that Freud saw within group psychology. And within the level of the individual that is a part of the group, Freud thought the group often dumbed down the person to a level that they would never have been had they not been a part of the group. They would have done better, been more self-critical, been more alert had they not been a part of the group. He compares an individual in sort of these kinds of groups to someone sort of under hypnotic trance, who starts to believe something because he's told that thing over and over and over again, repetitively for a very long time. And all of this, again, Freud saw none of this as good, saw none of it as leading to man's perfection or virtuous or anything like that. He saw the group as often robbing man of his strength, his robustness, his sharpness, his consciousness, and even his alertness to what was actually going on around him within reality. For Freud, I think you could say man was the freest when he was rational, critical, disbelieving of what he was told, and constantly searching for the truth. That was, I think, in Freud's view, when that was, for him, I think, a view of what psychological health would mean. And in his own life, I think he lived that out. If you read various portions of his biography, you can see the attachment he had at all costs to truth. And of course, when you totally search for the truth, when you're really searching and when you're really trying to verify things for yourself, you can't just stop at what the group believes. You can maybe start with the group's beliefs. You can maybe accept some of the group's beliefs, but you're always doing it for your own reasons. You're always doing it with certain modifications. You can't accept in totality what the group is saying or what the group is believing, but you're always sort of trying to bring your own perspective to it. You're trying to verify things the group is saying based on what's true. If you do that process diligently enough, you're likely to either totally reject the group's thinking, or if you accept it, you accept parts of it, not all of it, and even the parts you accept, you're likely to do so with some sort of modification. And so I guess we could say, in some of the terms we've been developing in the blog, the group can easily get stuck in and develop and create and have a passion for total nothingness. It can manufacture a form of nothing, and then no one within the group is concerned. First of all, no one sees it as nothing, and no one is concerned to get out of it. In terms of the brain biology we were discussing in some of the last posts, this can happen, in the formation of neurons and the electrical connections between the neurons and through the synapses, by constantly being exposed to varying images, to varying truths, to purported truths, to various explanations within the group, or to various values within the group, and ultimately over many years being just bombarded with this. There is obviously a tendency for the brain to sort of actually hardwire those beliefs in, so that it becomes very rigid and very, very difficult to get out of, and it becomes, it becomes literally a part of your brain. I would say it's literally hardwired and stably formed in there, just as if you work on creating a bridge somewhere, and you lay all the foundation and materials. After a while, you're actually going to have a bridge between 2 points, and it's going to be strong and it's going to be solid. And in the same way, I think the brain, if it engages in that kind of rewiring based on what the group thinks, it will form sort of a bridge of its own, as a stable core structure, which could be good, but it could be bad, is sort of the key point. And so I think we could ask, or a fair question one could ask, is any of this relevant, or is any of this a problem today? Starting out even with Plato's description in at 401D of the Republic of the danger of the potential guardians of the city being raised among images of evil and accepting things little by little, unwittingly, until those little by little acceptances ultimately add up to this one huge evil within their soul, in Plato's terms. Or is it not a problem? And I think in some sense you could say, well, today people are becoming more disconnected. They're less likely to participate in groups. There's the book Bowling Alone. There's various other studies that have been done showing that actual sort of traditional forms of group where people actually show up somewhere physically is declining. And I think the digital age has in fact made people a bit more disconnected and independent of each other, less likely to participate in those kind of group activities. But I think you still see the group influence in several areas, and I think two of them are TV and the internet, which is dominant pattern of lifestyle now for many people. There's work, and then one comes home and goes on various websites and watches various TV shows. That's a very common behavior for a lot of people nowadays. And is that in any way a group? Can we think of that as a group when you're participating in those activities? And I think while it doesn't have to be, in actuality it usually is, because I think in actuality, in potentially you could spend your life going to millions of different websites and just trying different ones every day, reading different stuff, and same with TV. And in that sense, you would really couldn't call you a group member or that activity as being in any way group-like. But most people, I think the dominant thing is to pick 5, 6, 7, 10 websites that you go to repetitively, and a couple TV shows, and in that sense you are, I think, becoming a part of the group, because it's if you look at I think most people do that. If you look at your internet browsing history or TV viewing patterns, you're going to see a common trend. You're going to see certain websites you're going to a lot. Same with TV programs. And these websites and these TV programs, most of them are group oriented. They're organized around some central activity. ESPN watching sports and teams, and CNBC would be the market, and various other things. Gardening station would be about gardening, and in watching that and participating in that, obviously there's a certain viewpoint or value system that's getting delivered through that common core message and interest in that website or TV station. And if you do that constantly, and if you keep going to those sites, and if you keep watching certain programs, you're going to, I think, accept those values. And I think in many ways then we get right back to group, in Freud's description of how the group works. And I think you can see that particularly in how TV and internet has now really moved toward images and moved toward less rational sort of critique or truth-seeking, and much more about sort of sophisticated, sleek, stylish presentations of various things, and sort of what I would say a lot of form over substance in a lot of these programs, and that is again intended to cause, in Freud's description of groups, an emotional stimulus in the audience, and to continue to ratchet that up to higher and higher levels. It's why you see these news programs, and they're and in the commentary, it's becoming almost impossible to listen to, because everyone is trying to outdo each other in terms of the emotional sort of fever-pitched anger and excessiveness of whatever they're trying to say. And I think you can see that although everyone watching those programs is not physically in a room like you would think of in a group, but I think you can see the same sort of negative issues Freud was concerned with arising in people that go on these websites and watch these sorts of programs on TV. So in light of that, what does the virtue of, and this post is going to go under practical wisdom, how's what we learned from Freud or any of this relevant to cultivating practical wisdom? And I want to suggest 4 things. I think first, you can always ask yourself, whether in today's age of the digital group or the TV group or whatever, or any other kind of still physical group you're a part of, is what or job. You could pose it in terms of your work. Certainly a form of group. What is this group actually doing to me and my thoughts about reality? What effect is it having? What change is it causing in me? Am I accepting the values of this group without sort of much, doubt or reflection? Am I sort of just taking it in, hook, line, and sinker? Is that sort of something I should do? Does that seem like a wise strategy? Probably not. It's probably a good idea to doubt and disbelieve the core messages of whatever group you're involved in at any time. You should ask yourself from time to time, not probably every day, but ask yourself, is this group going anywhere good? Is it really doing anything within reality? Is it getting anything done? Is the group just purely sort of fabricating and manufacturing sort of pure verbal illusory form without any sort of underlying substance of action? Is that all that's going on there? Or to the contrary, is the group actually getting something done and progressing, and is it causing your values to, in your view, get perfected and grow and mature? So that those would be sort of some questions you could ask with respect to any group you're a part of, and obviously try to ask those questions and answer them honestly based on information and facts and things that you can verifiably show and demonstrate to yourself. A second thing you could say from this discussion is you should, I think, prefer groups that have very transparent objectives that are finite and can be met. These are, I think, less likely to cause all the bad products that Freud talks about. For example, a group that gathers just to engage in a 1-hour walk weekly somewhere is unlikely to have all of the sort of destructive effects that Freud outlines. I doubt that group would cause you to have those kinds of changes in your brain and in your value system. And I just don't think that can happen, because you're gathering for a very specific purpose. It's very transparent what the group is doing. The objectives are usually met. You walk a certain distance, and that's it. Everyone knows what's going on. I think third, don't seek to forge your what I would call your existential identity, your self-creative tasks, your forming of a unique, interesting personality based on the whatever groups you're a part of. Those questions and those thoughts and those projects should always remain strictly your own, not those of whatever group you happen to be a part of. You can obviously consider certain things from the group as part of that project, but don't look to them to answer questions like who you should marry or what job you should do or where you should live. All of those questions are all your own. Those are your questions and your answers based on what you believe at the deepest level of your personality. Those should not be questions that you just adopt from the group without any understanding of why the answer that the group has been providing makes sense, whether it's good, whether it makes any sense, whether it made sense before, or maybe it doesn't make any sense now. Maybe the group's answer was good 20 years ago, but the group's answer is totally not kept up with reality as it now exists for you. And in that sense of not giving up that core freedom to create yourself, I was reminded the other day by a friend of that the Declaration of Independence lists liberty, freedom, as an inalienable right. Now, we all sort of read that, we all heard that, but does anyone actually think? Does anyone have sat down to think about what the word inalienable means in that section? And what it means is a right that can't be transferred. You can't. Inalienable means you can't give it away to anyone else. You can't deny this right, or you can't give it up. So freedom becomes, in terms of even within the Declaration, becomes a right that you should not give up to the group. You should not give up to anyone else. That would be, one could even say, an un-American way of being, if you give up that sort of core freedom to the group. And I think fourth, you can say that we should prefer groups that are open, that have an open architecture in terms of future goals, destinations, and projects, and even how things are being done now. Groups that are forward-seeking and intent on perfecting what the group is actually doing. Those are the groups that I think we should embrace. There's a blog on the web called ilovephilosophy.com, and that group you can go to. You go on there. There's not millions, but there's many threads, and everyone can go on there and ask any question they want. They can raise any question. They can participate in any discussion, and there's no agenda for the group. It's very open. It's very open to almost any question, and has certainly no I think it would probably, that as opposed to some of the other groups Freud talked about, that group would be one that would probably be beneficial in exactly the opposite and reverse ways that Freud says many groups are detrimental. So I think with that, I think we can say we've at least set up some questions that we could all ask about various groups we're in, and as I think most of the task of locating good is asking the right questions, at least asking the right questions, and also getting better and better answers to the questions. But at least those are some questions we could ask about the groups we're involved in, and judge their value and goodness by those questions and similar ones. So we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.